He answered the door in his own home, and within seconds, he was shot. Roger Fortson, a decorated U.S. airman, never had a chance. He never was able to explain. No warning, no de-escalation, just bullets. The deputy who killed him was responding to a vague report, acting on secondhand information from apartment staff. Roger was calm, lawful, alone, holding a legal firearm, as millions of Americans do. But somehow that made him a target. This just wasn't a tragedy. It was a blueprint on how law, race, and fear collide. How many more Rogers until America wakes up? So I ask you this question. Was it fear? Was it about race? Was it about incompetence? America is looking at this tragedy entirely in the wrong way, and I'll show you why. I'm Jerome Hill, and with me is retired Sheriff Victor Hill, and we're your hosts of Hill of Justice.
Two brothers, sons of a Navy SEAL. Jerome Hill, a former Baltimore PD officer and narcotics detective. Victor Hill, the former sheriff of Clayton County and author of Vigilante Sheriff. Now, they've joined forces to break down the hottest topics in law enforcement and beyond on the Hill of Justice.
So, brother, last week a judge ordered a former Florida deputy, Eddie Duran, charged with killing a 23-year-old U.S. senior airman, Roger Fortson, to remain in North Florida, denying his request for a change of his bond. Deputy Duran of the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office on May 24th is responding to some vague disturbance call, possibly domestic, and that's where I believe it was derived from. He arrived at the wrong unit, knocked on Fortson's door, and within seconds of opening it, shot him multiple times, despite Fortson being alone and legally armed. So the sheriff's office later ruled the shooting not objectively reasonable and fired him. And so at that point in time, he was then later charged with manslaughter. The case has sparked national outrage over race, gun rights, and police accountability, and the fragility of our constitutional protections, especially for Black Americans, even those in uniform. So I want you to take a look at this next clip of the 911 recording, and I'll see you on the other side, and we'll talk about it.
President who made a complaint.
He's fighting with someone else, and she's saying that it sounds like it's getting a little bit out of control.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
we can't go there to confront them, so I was wondering if you guys can send a call out for that. The apartment number is going to be 1401. She called, right when she called me, she said that she was calling me because it sounded like it was starting to get out of hand. She said that it sounded like it started getting physical.
Well, our deputy is there.
Okay. Let me see.
We have two deputies getting on scene.
Are they fighting or something?
In this body camera video, you can hear Okaloosa County Sheriff's deputies talking to the employee.
Okay.
But this time it sounded like it was getting out of hand.
Okay, which door?
What are your thoughts about that, listening to the 911 call?
Well, I mean, domestic situations are one of the most dangerous situations an officer can go to. I did review some of this, and I saw another report with a 911 caller had put into the log that someone thought they heard gunshots and everything like that. So you got an officer going into a situation where it's domestic. He believes someone's armed, and he believes that they have a weapon, unfortunately. And, unfortunately, when cops go on these calls, they only have a limited amount of information what to go by. And, we can't say the information is necessarily reliable, but you can't ignore it either. This is a tough one, Jerome. I've watched this tape that we get ready to watch. I can't condone this officer, and I can't completely condemn him either. And I'm going to tell you why as we watch the shooting.
Right. How are you responding to that call, given that type of information that you got from 911?
How would I have responded?
Mm-hmm.
Well, my understanding was another deputy there. I would have definitely had another deputy. We should have approached together. You try to have backup there if you can, but if it's a situation where you have to go in, you have to go in. And then I would have knocked on the door and asked the person to come out. It's always better to ask them to come out than to go in. And, the best police tactic there is when you're dealing with that is ask people, can they step out? Ask them if they're armed, and ask them to step out where you can see their hands. You know, the UNT was very unique about this case, and that's why it's hard to condone and it's hard to condemn. You know, does a man have a right to have a gun in his house? He absolutely does. Does he have the right to have the gun in his hand in his house? Of course he does. Uh, is it a good thing to come to a door or a wise thing when you know the police is outside with a gun in your hand? Probably not. It's not
How,
illegal and you have a right,
how did he
but
know? That's the
I
other
don't know
thing.
what the guy said sheriff's office.
Yeah, but that's not to say that the guy heard it inside. You could have had the TV on. You could have had a whole
Maybe,
bunch of things on.
maybe not. I mean, you know, there's a lot of we could what if this all day. But that's why it makes it a situation that's so hard to judge from because, you know, there's one of those situations where I see both sides clearly. I see a serviceman, he has a weapon, he has a right to have a weapon in his house. And I can't, you know, I've knocked on a lot of doors as cops, and I can't remember a lot of times someone answered the door with a gun in their hand. I'm not saying that's not their right, but if you're on a call and you think that you're going to an armed call and you heard a shots been fired, uh, that's an interesting situation to be in. So, you know, there's a lot of things that happen out here, and what we got to look at is the intent. You know, do I like what happened? No, I don't like what happened. I mean, that kid could have been my son. He reminds me of my nephew, your son, who served. And I don't like it. But let me tell you this. I've seen a lot of random situations. I think one I spoke about, one where uh a guy called the police and said, hey, there's a guy that's broken in my car and I'm holding it at gunpoint. And I was the first to pull up. And there was a guy in this car. He was holding it at gunpoint. And I asked the guy, hey, I got it, put the gun down, took the guy out the car, handcuffed him, and talked to him. He's like, I says, you know, tell me what's going on. And he said, I thought this was my car. And I said, you thought this was your car? Do you have a car like this? He said, I got one exactly like it. You got a key fob? Yes. Hit the key fob. Sure enough, same model, same make, everything. Just a fluke. He walks up to the car. He thinks it's his. The guy just happens to leave the door open. He opens the door, gets in, think he's in his car. The other guy sees a man in his car. He happens to have a gun and pointed. And what if this other guy just happened to have a gun and thought someone was coming up on him? Or what if he made a sudden move and this guy shot him? Both of them believe. One guy believed that he was getting in his car. The other guy believed if someone getting in my car and I think he's trying to steal my car. And there are random tragic incidents that occur that we got to really look at and look at the intent. Was it the intent? I want to go murder someone today.
Right,
Or was
right.
it a random circumstance that this person had a reaction? And not everyone reacts the same. You know, you and I had this conversation when we were talking about another shooting with a young man running with a gun. And you said, hey, the guy didn't point the gun or whatever. But, you know, here's one thing we got to think about. When do we say it's okay? Do we have to wait for them to point the gun? Because if you wait for them to point the gun, there's a over 50% chance that it's too late. Because if you wait for them to point the gun, they could well be pulling the trigger as they're pointing. So what you're basically saying is these officers have to wait for the gun to be pointed and a shot to be fired and hopefully miss. And then we'll go ahead and say it's okay to shoot.
Right.
It's
What
a
if he
very
caused?
difficult situation.
What if this deputy, if I showed you, he caused this? He caused this
He
incident to
he
happen.
he may have, but you know, again, what I'm saying is there's it's random circumstances that you have to look at objectively. I can't tell you I can sit there and condone this officer, and then I can't tell you I can 100% condemn him. But you got a lot of random circumstances. I got information that there's a house, there's a man armed, someone's heard shots, and then someone answers the door for his gun. I'm not saying that's not his right. I believe that's his right. We should all have a right to have a gun in our house, and if you want to have it in your hand, you have a right in your hand. I'm just saying that there are random circumstances that can happen and they're very, very tragic.
Right.
Does it
I'm gonna show
amount
you.
to? Yeah.
Well, what about to show you is exactly why this deputy is charged with manslaughter,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna walk it through with this next video we're about to show.
Mhm.
All right. I wanted to stop right there. If we could stop the video there. No other deputy. He's walking pretty calm. Okay. No lights and sirens. Okay. You have the element of surprise. So he's walking up to the door. We're going to play this a little bit more. I want to stop it right there before he. As you said, he has no partner. The
Mhm.
call came in as a domestic disturbance. We all know that we should have backup with us. In fact, 911 did explain that they got 2 deputies on the way. So, where was the urgency? But more importantly, why did he, at this point in time, knock? Why couldn't he just go ahead and stop? I do this all the time, trying to
And pause. I
listen
agree.
for what's going on inside, because I don't want to get nailed. So he's not even doing that. He's breaking everything that you would think that would be reasonable for a police officer to do. He is dead
Now
ass wrong.
I'm with you 100% that the tactics could be better. I think in a situation like that, element of surprise, we're trained to stop and listen. But being trained to stop and listen, still before you charge people with murder, there has to be intent. It's not Intent is not necessarily stupidity. Intent means I intend to kill somebody. Now, one thing
Well,
you
it's
said that he
manslaughter.
was charged. One thing you said that he's charged with manslaughter, which if it's Georgia, that makes more sense
Mhm,
because we got murder, we got manslaughter, and we've got involuntary manslaughter. So
mhm,
murder with man, I went there with the intent to kill somebody. I think when he's
uh-huh.
walking up to the door, he didn't know he's gonna kill somebody or not. So again, we're
I
talking
agree
about
with you on
intent.
that.
Right. So manslaughter is probably the most appropriate charge for this, if that's the
Correct.
case. So I'm happy to see that they didn't say, okay, well, we're gonna go with murder. That would be more appropriate if I think we're going where you say you're going. But let me say this. I think the tactics were poor. I think that there should have been a better approach to the door. But having poor tactics doesn't necessarily mean it makes it a murder. We agree on that, right?
Right. It doesn't make it a murder, but you can
Right.
damn sure can make it a manslaughter. And
That
that's what
could
he
be the
did.
case. That could be the case, or it definitely can make it involuntary manslaughter because
Mm, r-
involuntary manslaughter means that there's some type of reckless or negligence. But keep going.
Right. So at this point in time, he doesn't even do any of that. Okay. I'm trying to listen to as much as I possibly can. Why? Because I may have exigent circumstances to not even wait for somebody to do something. Isn't it what we do in the school shootings anyway? I may have to break in that door. The Supreme Court gives me that right. If I believe that there's a crime in place and something violent is going on, I hit that
Hmm.
door.
Hmm.
He doesn't even do that. So
Right.
the
And
problem
from what
is
we can hear on the video, we don't hear anything.
we don't
I
hear
mean,
that either. But
right. I
it's
don't know
his.
how good the sound quality, but we don't hear that.
But here's my problem too. You see how nonchalant he walked up to the door?
Hmm.
Where was
Let me tell you. Let me tell you what
that's
gets
craziness.
interesting. Let me tell you what gets interesting to me here. I know you're talking about that tactic, and I thought about it too. But here, if you want to talk about de-escalation or escalation, what gets interesting is when we fast forward because he walks up calmly, slowly, but the knock is extremely loud,
Mhm.
and it's almost like he's announcing. And don't get me wrong, you're supposed to announce you're there. That way, nobody can't say you didn't.
Right.
But it was interesting the tone of it. And don't get me wrong, people have different tones, but in a situation like that, I would probably start off with a lighter knock and saying, "Hey, I'm at the sheriff's office. Can you come out and talk to me? Just want to check with you, make sure you're okay." Again, we're Monday morning quarterback, and there's no law that you say you have to do it, but I think it would probably work better in this instance. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we got that going on. He's nonchalant coming up to the door. So at this point in time, are we talking about fear? Sure, there could be some fear there, but certainly it doesn't appear as though that he is quick with it at this point in time. I like to go ahead and start the video again. Let's see what happens thereafter.
Mm-hmm.
He hesitates. He gets out of the fatal funnel.
He does. The first knock is not that loud,
No.
but keep watching.
Sheriff's office, open the door.
Now stop right there. Stop right there. Now, Luti, that's what caught my attention right there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You are going to a situation where you have been told there's possibly a guy. I get that, and that's understandable. So you should be on alert. And then there's also this other information out there that someone said they thought they heard 2 or 3 shots. But right now, you're not hearing anything or whatever like that. The knock was gentle, but it was real interest in that tone. And now, don't get me wrong. I don't want to Monday morning quarterback this guy to death and say, well, you do this way, do this way. But if there's not a lot of noise, I always try to, hey, y'all doing all right in there? I just want to talk to you, make sure you're okay, and see what you get first. But there is a high level of sheriff office opened the door and it's very, very loud, which is very interesting because it went from a knock that was kind of gentle to that. I don't know what that is. Is it fear? Is it personality? I don't know. But, only he knows. But let's keep going.
Yeah. So as he goes, he blades himself away.
Sheriff's office, open the door. Step out.
Stop. Okay. So, of course, we see the gun in his hand. He puts his hand up. Of course, the gun, let's talk about the officer. He had his gun already holstered, so you can hear it coming out of the holster. All right. He tells him to step back. All right. And he tells him to step back and then gives him the order and then just goes on with the shots. The young man is on the ground afterwards. And he's telling the deputy, I don't have the gun. Yeah. After
Right,
he already,
because he dropped it. Yeah.
yeah. So
Did
as
the
tragic,
officer did they render aid?
I'm
Do we
sure
know?
he did. I'm sure he did.
Okay.
I would like to think that was the case. Let's
Okay.
play the rest of it as we'll hear the last 2 seconds.
Sheriff's office, open the door. Step out. Drop the gun! Drop the gun! It's over there. Drop the gun!
What burns me up is you telling him to drop the gun after you put
After you
it
shot
free.
him.
Come on,
Yeah.
Cat. The other,
Yeah.
what's that all about?
Yeah.
It,
I wish I could have seen the angle. There's a point that when that door opens, you can't see anything. And I don't know. And that could further be more damning than this tape already is. Or it could be something we haven't seen. I wish I could see that. One thing about cameras, they don't catch everything. I know by the time that door is open, his hand is clearly down. The gun is clearly pointed down. We'll never know which way the gun was when the door is open. We can't say 100% which way the gun was or what exactly the officer saw. I can't make a judgment on that one way or another. I can't condemn or condone. But I wish we could see that.
Yeah. And I would go on to say that, obviously people do feel as though that this was racially motivated. And I have a hard time coming to that. I do know it's entirely possible that the Deputy Duran could be biased, but not explicitly racist. And how I come to that is that bias by itself can be dangerous all to itself, and
Mm-hmm.
so if you are a police and you're using use of force, it can manifest in many different forms, racial, situational. We all know all about that. But his implicit bias, and what we know about implicit bias through research, and it shows that black men are often subconsciously perceived as being more threatening, even when unarmed. So that is something that we have to put onto the table. Now, Fortson was a black man, of course, and holding a gun, which, despite being legal, may have triggered a faster threat assessment to the deputy. Um,
It's true.
and so, but we got the historical patterns that we see too. And those are the disproportionate numbers of unarmed black individuals killed by police.
So let's stop right there, brother. Let's stop right there.
Mhm.
Let's take race out of it for a second, because I'm not saying the guy isn't racist. I'm not saying he is racist, but we can't prove that one way or another. But let's just say that was a black officer there, and black officers overreact as well too.
Right.
You and I've covered on this show
Mhm.
where you felt it was an overreaction, and we couldn't say it was race because it was two black individuals, a black law enforcement and a black person that unfortunately was killed. So let's if we can turn a blind eye to that possibility for a second, then let's deal with the fear factor.
Correct.
There are
That's why I
officers
want to
who are
flip it too.
exactly, there are officers who are high strung, and
Hmm.
there are different officers that have different fear levels. You know, and fear is an interesting thing. Then you have officers that are afraid of certain things. I've actually worked with officers over my career that had some interesting phobias. One was afraid of dogs. I mean, literally, we was on a car. He's on top of a car because he's afraid of a dog. I mean, and then you wonder, how do we mitigate that when we hire people? But and he would overreact anytime it came to something with a dog. Actually, shot at one. And I can't remember if he hit that dog or not. It's been so long. Another officer who is afraid of dead bodies. Listen, when we went to
I do this
detectives,
job.
he could not work homicide because he was afraid of dead bodies. If when we were in patrol, he couldn't go into a house if it was a dead body. They maintained him all those years. He retired. This dude actually became the chief of police, believe it or not. But he was afraid of dead bodies. He was too afraid to go to his relative's funeral. He had this phobia. Then there was another officer. His nickname was Snake. He was terrified of snakes. One night they put a fake snake in his car because they knew how terrified he was. And he pulled out his gun and he started shooting at the snake. And from that moment, that's why we called him Snake. To this day, even though he's retired, they call him Snake.
Right.
So what I want to say is this: we hire people and we say, well, you shouldn't be afraid if you're out there. But we got some folks that are out there and they have various different levels of phobias, and they have phobias over different things that you just wouldn't think some people would have phobias over. Believe it or not, there's officers that are afraid of water. They can't swim.
Right.
You probably can get away with that here in Atlanta because all we really have is a few lakes.
Right.
But where you're at,
No,
you might want to
haven't.
be able to swim
That's
if
part of
you're
the
in law
testing,
enforcement.
actually, here in Florida.
Right.
Right.
So this is not to condone or condemn,
Right.
but different people have different fear levels, and some people react to things quicker and faster than you and I would because we feel comfortable around people with guns.
Right. Right.
Uh, so again, this is a tragic situation.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, we could
no
say what
matter,
led to it. We could say
yeah,
that he was poorly trained.
exactly,
Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was trained correctly. Maybe
and
on
did
that
and didn't
day
take the training
he was
exactly.
overstimulated and he just completely lost his mind in a high pressure situation. You have people like that too.
And
So
that,
you can have
yes,
those information. That information is critical for people like that. You talked about fear, paranoia. Sometimes overconfidence will go ahead and get you, but these are some of the biases that is going on, and no one is talking about this. And let me make something very clear:
uh-huh.
bias, as I was stating, kills. Until we call that out, the system will still keep on turning legal gun owners into body bags because
Yeah.
he had a right to continue on, and they didn't. And we do have a double standard in America. You walk into a white man's home and you see a gun. Guess what? He's a patriot. You walk into a black man's home, you see a gun. he's a threat. And how do I qualify that? Did you hear anything from the NRA? The NRA was super loud
I
for Kyle Rittenhouse, but it was
hmm
silent for him. So
well,
Rittenhouse, and then I can even go back to even Castile, if you remember that in Minnesota. The police officer, he announced to the police officer in the car stop, "Hey, I have a weapon right here." And the officer still shot and killed him. But how people
well,
get mad and pissed off is
hmm
Clive. If you remember Clive Bundy, that was that rancher in Nevada. He had him and had a armed militia
Yeah.
pointing at the federal police, and no one got popped. And then you take a look at things like this, and that's why I bring up the race. That's why I bring up the cultural bias that goes on, because
no,
people see that.
and I get that. Listen, we can't deny the elephant in the room. Can we prove one way or another? No. I mean, you know, could it be race involved? Of course it could. Could it be paranoia or fear involved? Of course it can. Well, we know it's fear and paranoia involved.
Sure.
Why is it? Is it the fear of race, or is it the fear of being shot? We don't know. I mean, we would only have to be in his head. But let me tell you what I think the call for action is. And as a former administrator, this has haunted me and will always haunt me. I don't know the answer, but we need to find the answer. When we're hiring officers, they all go through a psychological exam, but you wonder because so many people pass it, and then we see so much weird behavior after they're there. And then some of them, maybe they were fine when they got hired, but maybe the stress over the years, maybe seeing people's heads blown off and stuff for a while. Certain people got certain tolerance levels, and their mind can only take so much. I don't know, but we've got to figure this out because you could hear the escalation and the fear in this guy's voice, even though there was no immediate known threat other than the information given.
Right.
The way he started screaming, "Sheriff's office, open the door." It sounded more like, not like he was investigating, but like he was serving a warrant. Like, "Hey, I got a warrant. You need to come out."
I'm glad you brought
And
that point out, because
uh-huh.
Keith, you're right on that, because the issue is when you're banging on the door like that, if you're loud like that, guess what? So the other people are going to be startled too. But if I'm quiet and I tell you, "Keith, come here, I need to talk to you about something," chances are you're going to try to listen to me more carefully.
I agree. I agree.
And
And,
this
and,
is
and also the tone. "Hey, just here to
right.
check on you. Can you come out and let us know you're okay? Just checking on you. All right in there?"
Yeah.
You know, and that's what. But again, we've got to figure this out. You've been out on calls, and you know what it's like. There's some officers, they get in a chase and they get in a fight and they're screaming at the top of their lungs, and it's like it's and then other officers are chasing, fighting, shooting, and their voice remains the same, and they're able to maintain a certain uh demeanor.
Mhm.
And why is that different from one officer to the next? I haven't studied psychology that deep. Can I guarantee it's something that we can train people for? I hope so. But we've got to figure that out. So there's one reason why one officer goes on the scene and he's calm, and another officer is a lot of it. Some could be hereditary, some could be training, some could be upbringing. But we've got to figure that out
Mhm.
because we've all seen officers that's cool, calm, and collected, bullets are flying over their head, and then the other one screaming at the top of their lungs until the octave level. You would think they're an opera singer
Yeah,
or
I've
something.
heard that over and over
Yeah,
again. Yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah.
And
And I think that's what we got to figure out because we notice that when incidents like this happen, it's usually someone that fits that psychological profile that their voice gets real high and they're screaming, they're yelling.
right, right. And then,
And I think that's the call to action for this. How do we detect that before we hire these officers? Or is that something that can be corrected? And who corrects it? Is it psychologists? Is it some type of training? Is it some type of meditation?
yeah, it's
I don't
hard to
know.
say.
Yeah.
I just know that a U.S. airman who was FaceTiming his girlfriend, opened the door to his death.
Yeah.
And thus, you know, this country is very much big on the Second Amendment. In the state and the country calls him a hero, but he goes out in a body bag. And
I agree.
and here
I
we
agree.
are, we have institutions that will clamor and fight and see Rittenhouse kill 2 people going to a disturbance that was in another state. He travels to that state and kills 2 people. And then this guy, he's doing
Let me say
everything
this.
by the book.
Let me say this, Jerome, and I say this with all reverence. And first of all, we forgot to extend our condolence to the family. I
Yeah, for
mean,
sure.
and I would never want to say anything that would offend them at their time of loss, because they've lost a person that they should not have lost. And I think we all
Absolutely.
agree on that.
Right.
So when I say this, we have a right to answer the door with a gun in our hand if that's what we want to do. But that's not necessarily probably a wise thing to do if we know law enforcement on the other side, because we could have someone like
If we know.
this who's going to overreact, right? If we know. Dad said something to me before our dad passed, and I'll never forget this. He was correcting my driving. And I was telling Dad, I said, hey, I got the right of way. And I'll never forget this. He says, son, there's a lot of tombstones that says, here lies the
I
man
remember him
that
saying
had
that.
the right of way. I'm sure he told you that,
Yeah,
because I
all
drive a
the
whole
time.
lot better than you did. Right. So, did I have the right of way? Yes. But if there's an 18-wheeler coming, probably not a good idea
Probably
to say,
not.
hey, I got the right of way.
Yeah.
And this young man, I'm so sorry for what happened,
Yeah,
but
me too.
I don't want everyone to think it's a good idea to answer a door with a firearm. And I say that with all due respect and sympathy for the family and the loss of this young man, because this is a tragedy that I agree should not have happened.
Right. So, wanted to show like this. Certainly, our thoughts and prayers are to the family. He deserved better, and we didn't give him better, and that's the sad part about this. But we want to also go ahead and tell everyone, continue to keep on subscribing, liking, commenting. We're really growing, and we really appreciate that. So, on behalf of everyone here at the Hill of Justice, I want to say good night. Thank you.